December 1847, Wyoming Territory. The howling wind carried death on its breath that bitter winter morning. 5 small shapes huddled beneath a threadbare blanket against the twisted remains of a wagon wheel, their lips already turning blue from the merciless cold. The oldest, a girl of barely 12 summers, pulled her younger siblings closer as the snow began to fall harder. Their parents lay silent in the white drifts nearby, claimed by the harsh frontier, just as it had claimed so many others. No one was coming. No one even knew they were there. The children had perhaps hours before the cold claimed them too, until hoofbeats thundered through the storm and a lone rider appeared like an answer to their desperate prayers. Evangeline Thornfield had lived through enough Wyoming winters to know when death rode the wind. She pulled her thick wool coat tighter around her shoulders as she guided her sturdy mare Duchess along the treacherous mountain path. The storm had been building for days, and any sensible person would have stayed put by their fire until it passed. But Evangeline had never been accused of being sensible. At 43, she had buried a husband, lost 2 children to fever, and kept her ranch running through drought, flood, and the constant threat of raiders. Her weathered hands gripped the reins with the same determination that had carried her through 16 years of frontier life. Today, she was making the journey to town for supplies before the worst of the storm hit. The wind shifted, and something caught her eye through the swirling snow. Dark shapes against the white landscape, too regular to be rocks, too still to be animals. Evangeline's heart clenched as she recognized the scattered remains of a wagon train. She had seen too many of these tragedies over the years. Families who had underestimated the brutality of the frontier. "Easy, girl," she whispered to Duchess as they approached the wreckage. The mare's breath formed clouds in the frigid air, and her hooves crunched through the snow that had already begun to cover the scene. Evangeline dismounted and walked carefully among the debris, overturned wagons, scattered belongings, and the still forms of the dead painted a grim picture. Raiders, most likely, followed by the storm. She had seen it before. The combination was often fatal for traveling families. A soft whimper stopped her cold. She turned toward the sound, her heart racing. There, huddled against the remains of a wagon wheel, was a small pile of children. 5 of them, the oldest girl, she couldn't be more than 12, trying desperately to keep the younger ones warm with a blanket that was more holes than fabric. Sweet. "Mary and Joseph," Evangeline breathed, rushing toward them. The girl looked up with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. Her auburn hair was matted with snow, and her face was pale as winter itself. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth, "please help my brothers and sisters." Evangeline knelt beside them, her practiced eye taking in their condition. They were close to freezing, but still alive. The youngest, a boy who couldn't be more than 3, was barely conscious in his sister's arms. "What's your name, child?" Evangeline asked gently, already shrugging out of her thick coat. "Abigail," the girl replied. "Abigail Morrison. These are my brothers Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and my sisters Prudence and Little Mercy." Evangeline wrapped her coat around the shivering children. "How long have you been here?" "Since yesterday morning," Abigail said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The men came at dawn. They took everything, and when Papa tried to stop them..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Hush now," Evangeline said firmly. "You're safe now, all of you." She looked around at the 5 children, Abigail clearly the eldest and trying to be strong for the others. Jeremiah, perhaps 10 years old, with the same auburn hair as his sister. Prudence, maybe 8, with wide blue eyes that had seen too much. Ezekiel, around 6, clutching a wooden toy horse. And Little Mercy, the youngest, barely conscious from the cold. "Can you help me get them on my horse?" Evangeline asked Abigail. "My ranch isn't far, and we need to get them warm." Abigail nodded, though her movements were stiff from the cold. Together they managed to get the children onto Duchess, with Evangeline walking alongside to steady them. The mare, well-trained and gentle, seemed to understand the urgency and picked her way carefully through the snow. The journey to the Thornfield ranch took an hour that felt like a lifetime. The wind howled around them, and Evangeline kept talking to keep the children conscious, telling them about her warm house and the soup she would make them. When the ranch house finally came into view, Evangeline had never been more grateful to see her home. The two-story log structure sat in a small valley, protected from the worst of the wind by a grove of pine trees. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Her foreman, Thomas Whitmore, had kept the fires burning while she was away. "Thomas," she called, as they approached the house. "Thomas, I need help." The front door opened and Thomas appeared. A man in his 50s with silver hair and kind eyes, who had worked for Evangeline since just after her husband's death. He took one look at the children and immediately understood. "Dear Lord," he said, rushing to help. "What happened?" "Raiders," Evangeline said simply as they carried the children inside. "Get the fireplace going strong and bring every blanket." "We have." "And put water on to boil. We need to warm them up slowly." The interior of the ranch house was a stark contrast to the deadly cold outside. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books. Evangeline had worked hard to make it a home, and now it would serve as a refuge for these 5 orphaned children. They settled the children on the thick rug in front of the fireplace, wrapping them in warm blankets. Little Mercy was unconscious, her breathing shallow, and Evangeline worked quickly to check her pulse and breathing. "She's alive," she told Abigail, who was watching with terrified eyes. "But she's very cold. We need to warm her up slowly." Thomas brought bowls of warm broth, and Evangeline helped the conscious children drink. Jeremiah and Ezekiel were shivering, violently, but they were alert. Prudence clung to Abigail, her eyes wide with shock. "Are our parents?" Jeremiah asked, his voice small. Evangeline looked at Abigail, who nodded slightly. The girl had already accepted the truth. "I'm sorry," Evangeline said gently. "They're gone. But you're safe now. All of you." As the evening wore on, the children slowly warmed up. Little Mercy regained consciousness and began to cry, a sound that, while heartbreaking, meant she was getting stronger. Evangeline fed them, soup and bread, and slowly their color began to return. "Where were you headed?" Evangeline asked Abigail when the girl seemed strong enough to talk. "Oregon," Abigail replied. "Papa said we'd have a farm there, with rich soil and plenty of water. He said it would be better than Missouri." Evangeline nodded. She had heard the stories, families heading west with dreams of better lives, often unprepared for the harsh realities of the frontier. "Do you have any family there? Anyone expecting you?" Abigail shook her head. "Just us. Papa said we'd make our own way." As the night deepened, Evangeline made sleeping arrangements. The children would stay in the main room by the fire where it was warmest. She brought down pillows and blankets from upstairs, creating a comfortable nest for them. "Mrs. Thornfield," Abigail said as Evangeline tucked them in. "Why did you help us? You don't even know us." Evangeline paused in her work, looking down at the girl's earnest face. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said simply. "And because I know what it's like to lose everything." That night, Evangeline sat by the fire long after the children had fallen asleep, watching their peaceful faces and thinking about the twist of fate that had brought them to her. She had lost her own children to fever 5 years ago, a boy and a girl who would have been close to these children's ages. She had thought her mothering days were over. But perhaps God had other plans. Evangeline woke before dawn, as was her habit. The fire had burned low during the night, and she quietly added more wood, trying not to wake the sleeping children. Little Mercy had cried several times during the night, and Abigail had comforted her without waking the others. The girl had the instincts of a natural mother. In the kitchen, Evangeline prepared a hearty breakfast, eggs from her chickens, bacon from her smokehouse, and fresh biscuits. The children would need good food to rebuild their strength. As she worked, she could hear them stirring in the main room, their voices soft as they whispered to each other. "Good morning," she said when she entered the main room with a tray of food. "How are you feeling?" "Better, ma'am," Abigail said, sitting up and smoothing her hair. "Thank you for everything." The other children were awake now, looking around the room with curious eyes. In the daylight, Evangeline could see them more clearly. Jeremiah had his father's strong jaw and serious demeanor. Prudence was delicate and shy, staying close to Abigail. Ezekiel was the most curious, his eyes taking in every detail of the room. And little Mercy, now that she was warm and fed, was beginning to show signs of being a typical 3-year-old. "Are you going to send us to the orphanage?" Ezekiel asked suddenly, his voice small. Evangeline paused in serving breakfast. "Is that what you're worried about?" "Papa said if anything happened to him and Mama, we'd go to the orphanage," Jeremiah said. "He said families like us, we stick together." Evangeline looked at the 5 children, seeing the fear in their eyes despite their brave faces. She had been thinking about this very question all night. What was she going to do with 5 orphaned children? "Let's not worry about that right now," she said gently. "First, you need to get your strength back. Then we'll figure out what comes next." After breakfast, Thomas came in from the barn, stamping snow off his boots. "Storm's getting worse," he reported. "Probably won't clear for a couple of days." Evangeline nodded. "Thomas, I'd like you to meet our guests. Children, this is Mr. Whitmore. He helps me run the ranch." Thomas tipped his hat to the children. "Pleasure to meet you all. I'm sorry about your troubles." "Thank you, sir," Abigail said politely. "Thomas, can you show the boys around the barn later, if they're feeling up to it?" Evangeline asked. Thomas smiled. "I'd be happy to. Got some new foals they might like to see." As the day progressed, the children began to relax. Jeremiah and Ezekiel were fascinated by the ranch, asking endless questions about the cattle and horses. Prudence helped Evangeline in the kitchen, proving to be a quick learner. Abigail divided her time between helping with little Mercy and keeping an eye on her siblings. "You don't have to watch them every second," Evangeline told her gently. "They're safe here." "I know," Abigail said. "It's just, I promised Papa I'd take care of them. It's been just me and them since Mama died 2 years ago." Evangeline's heart ached for the girl. So much responsibility for someone so young. "Your parents would be proud of how well you've cared for them." That evening, as they sat around the fire after dinner, Ezekiel asked, "Mrs. Thornfield, do you have any children?" Evangeline felt the familiar pang of loss. "I did. A boy and a girl. They died of fever 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "So am I," Evangeline replied. "But you know what? Having you all here, it reminds me of good times, when this house was full of laughter and children's voices." Little Mercy had fallen asleep in Evangeline's lap, and she stroked the child's hair gently. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need to." "But what about the orphanage?" Jeremiah asked. Evangeline looked at each of the children in turn. "What if I told you that you didn't have to go to an orphanage? What if I told you that you could stay here with me?" The children exchanged glances, hardly daring to hope. "Do you mean it?" Abigail asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I mean it," Evangeline said firmly, "but it wouldn't be easy. This is a working ranch, and everyone would have to do their part. You'd have chores and responsibilities. And I'd expect you to go to school. There's a teacher in town who comes out to the ranches." "We can work," Jeremiah said eagerly. "Papa taught us all to work." "And we stick together," Ezekiel added. "We're a family," Evangeline smiled. "Yes, you are. And now if you'll have me, you can be my family too." The storm lasted 3 days, giving them time to settle into routines. Evangeline discovered that the Morrison children were well-behaved and eager to help. Their parents had raised them with strong values and a good work ethic. Abigail proved to be an excellent helper with the cooking and cleaning. She had been managing a household for 2 years and knew how to make a little go a long way. Jeremiah was fascinated by the ranch work and followed Thomas around like a shadow, learning about caring for cattle and horses. Prudence was quiet but observant, showing a talent for sewing and mending. Ezekiel was the most curious, asking endless questions about everything from the books on Evangeline's shelves to the way the wind patterns affected the weather. And little Mercy was beginning to show her personality, a sweet child who loved to sing and laugh. On the 4th day, the storm cleared, and Evangeline made the journey to town with Thomas. She needed to report the attack on the wagon train to the sheriff and to make some purchases for her expanded household. Willowbrook was a small frontier town with a main street lined with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a few other businesses. Sheriff Jake Morrison, no relation to the children despite the name, was a good man who took his job seriously. 5 children, he said, shaking his head as Evangeline told him about the attack. And you're planning to keep them all? I am, Evangeline said firmly. Well, that's mighty generous of you, Evangeline, but 5 children, that's a lot of mouths to feed. I can manage, she replied. The ranch is doing well, and I have money saved. At the general store, Evangeline bought fabric for new clothes, school supplies, and extra food. The storekeeper, Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, was curious about her purchases. Heard. You took in some orphans, she said, not unkindly. Yes, 5 of them. Good children who deserve a chance. That's Christian of you, Mrs. Hartwell said. If you need any help with the sewing, my daughter Rebecca is handy with a needle. Evangeline thanked her and made arrangements for the town's teacher, Miss Caroline Porter, to come out to the ranch twice a week to tutor the children. When she returned home, she found the children helping Thomas with the evening chores. Jeremiah was feeding the horses, Ezekiel was collecting eggs, and Prudence was helping Abigail prepare dinner. Little Mercy was napping by the fire. How did it go in town? Abigail asked. Very well, Evangeline said. I've arranged for a teacher to come out twice a week, and I bought fabric to make you all new clothes. The children's faces lit up. They had been wearing the same clothes for days, and while Evangeline had done her best to clean them, new clothes would be a luxury. Mrs. Thornfield, Jeremiah said, Thomas said you might let me help with the spring roundup. If you're still here in the spring, and if you've proven you can handle the responsibility, then yes, Evangeline said. We'll still be here, Ezekiel said confidently. This is our home now. Evangeline smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart that had nothing to do with the fire. Yes, it is. As January turned to February, the children settled into life on the ranch. They had their own routines. Now, Abigail helped with the cooking and managed the household accounts, proving to have a head for numbers. Jeremiah worked with Thomas, learning about cattle and ranch management. Prudence tended to the chickens and helped with the sewing. Ezekiel, despite his young age, was proving to be handy with repairs and maintenance. And little Mercy brought joy to everyone with her laughter and songs. Miss Porter, the teacher, came twice a week and was impressed with the children's intelligence and eagerness to learn. All of them could read and write, and they were curious about subjects beyond their basic education. They're bright children, she told Evangeline after one of her sessions. Abigail especially has a gift for mathematics and could probably run a business someday. And Jeremiah has a natural understanding of animals and the land. But life on the frontier was never easy, and February brought new challenges. A pack of wolves had been troubling the area, and several ranchers had lost cattle. Thomas and Evangeline took turns standing watch at night, and the children were not allowed to go far from the house alone. One evening, as they sat around the fire, they heard howling in the distance. Little Mercy clung to Evangeline, and even the older children looked nervous. They won't come near the house, Evangeline assured them. But we need to be careful. The next morning, they discovered that the wolves had killed one of their calves. It was a loss they could afford, but it was a reminder of the dangers of frontier life. Papa always said the frontier was hard, Abigail said as they examined the remains. He said it took strong people to survive out here. Your father was right, Evangeline said. But strength isn't just about being tough. It's about looking out for each other, working together, and never giving up. That night, as they were preparing for bed, Jeremiah approached Evangeline. Mrs. Thornfield, I want to help with the watch. I'm old enough. Evangeline studied the boy's serious face. He was only 10, but he had the maturity of someone much older. It's dangerous, Jeremiah, and you need your sleep. I can't sleep anyway. Knowing those wolves are out there, he said, and I want to help protect our family. The word family caught Evangeline off guard. Somewhere along the way, without her really noticing, these children had become her family. Not just her responsibility, but her heart. All right, she said. But you stay with me or Thomas at all times. No wandering off. Jeremiah nodded solemnly. "I promise." The wolf problem was solved a week later by a group of hunters who tracked down the pack. But the experience had brought the family closer together, and Evangeline realized how much she had come to depend on the children, just as they depended on her. Spring came early that year, and with it, new hope. The children had been with Evangeline for 3 months now, and it was hard to imagine life without them. They had grown and changed, not just physically, but emotionally. The trauma of losing their parents was still there, but it was tempered by the security of their new home and the love of their new family. Abigail had become Evangeline's right hand, managing the household with efficiency and grace. She had also begun to smile more, and sometimes Evangeline caught her humming while she worked. Jeremiah had grown taller and stronger, and his knowledge of ranch work impressed even Thomas. Prudence had come out of her shell, chattering about the books she was reading and the wildflowers she found on walks. Ezekiel had become the family's unofficial repair expert, able to fix anything from a broken fence to a loose door hinge. And little Mercy had grown into a confident, happy child who called Evangeline Mama Eva and considered the ranch hands her personal entertainment committee. The spring roundup was a major event, with neighboring ranchers coming to help. Evangeline had participated in many roundups over the years, but this was the first time she had children to worry about. She had made strict rules about where they could go and what they could do. "I want to help," Jeremiah said for the 100th time as they prepared for the roundup. "You can help," Evangeline said, "but you'll stay with Thomas, and you'll do exactly what he tells you." The roundup was a success, with the cattle healthy and the count better than expected. Jeremiah proved to be a natural horseman, and several of the other ranchers commented on his skill. "That boy's got a gift," said Samuel Hendricks, whose ranch bordered Evangeline's. "He'll make a fine rancher someday." Evangeline felt a surge of pride. These children were hers now in every way that mattered, and their successes were her successes. But not everything was perfect. In April, a letter arrived from the territorial government. Someone had reported that Evangeline was caring for 5 orphaned children without proper legal guardianship. An official would be coming to investigate. Evangeline's heart sank as she read the letter. She had been so focused on caring for the children that she hadn't thought about the legal implications. What if they decided she wasn't fit to care for them? What if they split up the family? "What's wrong?" Abigail asked, noticing her distress. Evangeline showed her the letter. Abigail's face went pale. "Are they going to take us away?" she asked. "Not if I can help it," Evangeline said firmly. "We'll figure this out." The territorial official, Mr. Reginald Blackwood, arrived on a Tuesday morning in May. He was a thin, stern-looking man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a permanent frown. He inspected the house, interviewed the children, and reviewed Evangeline's financial records. The children appear to be well cared for, he admitted grudgingly. But the law requires proper procedures to be followed. You cannot simply take in 5 orphaned children without going through the proper channels. "What proper channels?" Evangeline asked. "There was no time for proper channels. These children would have died if I hadn't helped them." "That may be so," Mr. Blackwood said. "But the law is the law. These children should be in an orphanage until proper placements can be found." "No," Abigail said suddenly, stepping forward. "We won't go. This is our home now." "Young lady, you don't have a choice in the matter," Mr. Blackwood said coldly. "She does if I adopt them," Evangeline said, the idea coming to her suddenly. "Can I adopt them?" Mr. Blackwood looked surprised. "Well, yes, but the process is complicated. You would need to prove you can provide for them financially, demonstrate that you can provide proper moral guidance, and show that you have the community's support." "Then that's what I'll do," Evangeline said. Over the next few weeks, Evangeline worked tirelessly to meet the requirements for adoption. She gathered letters of support from the sheriff, the teacher, the preacher, and several neighboring ranchers. She provided detailed financial records showing she could support the children. She even submitted to interviews with various officials. Children were terrified they would be separated, but they also worked hard to show they belonged on the ranch. Jeremiah demonstrated his skills with the cattle. Abigail showed her household management abilities. Prudence displayed her sewing and cooking skills. Ezekiel fixed several broken items around the house. And little Mercy charmed everyone with her sweet nature. The final hearing was held in the county seat, a day's ride away. The whole family made the journey, nervous but determined. Judge William Thatcher, a stern but fair man, presided over the case. "Mrs. Thornfield," he said, "you're asking to adopt 5 children at once. That's highly unusual. They're siblings." "Your Honor," Evangeline said, "they belong together." "And you believe you can provide for them all?" "I do, Your Honor. I have a successful ranch, money in the bank, and more importantly, I have love to give them." The judge questioned each of the children individually. Abigail spoke eloquently about her desire to stay with her siblings and how much Evangeline meant to them. Jeremiah talked about his plans to help run the ranch. Prudence shyly explained how much she loved her new home. Ezekiel, despite his young age, spoke confidently about his place in the family. And when little Mercy was asked who she wanted to live with, she simply said, "Mama Eva and my brothers and sisters." After deliberating for what felt like hours, Judge Thatcher returned with his decision. "Mrs. Thornfield," he said, "it's clear that these children have found a loving home with you, and it's equally clear that you have found a family with them. I hereby grant your petition for adoption. These children are now legally yours." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Evangeline hugged each of the children, tears streaming down her face. They were a family now, legally, officially, and forever. Summer passed in a blur of happiness. The children threw themselves into ranch life with renewed enthusiasm, knowing they truly belonged there. Abigail, now legally Abigail Thornfield, took over more of the household management and began keeping detailed records of the ranch's operations. Jeremiah, now Jeremiah Thornfield, became Thomas's official apprentice and showed remarkable skill with horses. Prudence, now Prudence Thornfield, started a small garden and began selling vegetables to the townspeople. Ezekiel, now Ezekiel Thornfield, revealed a talent for woodworking and made furniture for their house. And little Mercy, now Mercy Thornfield, continued to be the sunshine of their household. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Evangeline had never been happier, and the children had found security and love they never thought they'd have again. In August, a new wagon train passed through the area. This one was better prepared and well protected, but seeing it reminded everyone of how far they had come. The children stood on the porch watching the wagons pass, and Evangeline joined them. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had been different?" Abigail asked. "If the raiders hadn't attacked, if we'd made it to Oregon?" "Sometimes," Evangeline admitted. "But I think this is where you were meant to be. All of you." "Do you think Papa and Mama would be proud of us?" Jeremiah asked. "I know they would," Evangeline said firmly. "You've all grown into remarkable young people. You've worked hard, supported each other, and shown more courage than most adults." As autumn approached, the family prepared for their first winter together as an official family. They had learned so much in the past year about resilience, about love, about what it truly meant to be a family. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Evangeline looked at each of her children and marveled at the journey that had brought them together. A year ago, she had been a lonely widow with too many empty rooms and too many memories. Now her house was full of laughter, love, and the sound of children's voices. "I want to tell you all something," she said. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left to give. But you children, you gave me a reason to live again. You gave me a family again. I want you to know that saving you that day in the snow was the best thing I ever did. You didn't just save us," Abigail said softly. "You gave us a home, a real home. And we'll never leave." Jeremiah added, "This is where we belong, all of us," Ezekiel said, and little Mercy nodded solemnly from her place on Evangeline's lap. Thomas, who had become like a grandfather to the children, wiped his eyes. "This old house has never been happier," he said. "You can hear it in the way the wind sings through the eaves. It knows it's a home again." December 1852. The Thornfield Ranch had grown considerably in 5 years. What had started as a modest cattle operation had expanded to include horse breeding, farming, and even a small lumber business. The family had grown too, not in number, but in strength, love, and success. Abigail, now 17, had become Evangeline's full partner in running the ranch. She had a keen business mind and had established trade relationships with buyers as far away as Denver. She had also caught the attention of several young men in the area, though she was in no hurry to marry. She had responsibilities to her family and big dreams for the ranch's future. Jeremiah, now 15, was as fine a horseman as any in the territory. He had bred and trained several horses that had won prizes at the territorial fair. He talked about starting his own horse ranch someday, but for now, he was content to be his mother's right hand in the cattle business. Prudence, now 13, had become the family's connection to the community. She taught Sunday school at the church, organized charity drives for needy families, and had started a small school for the children of the ranch hands. She had a gentle way with people that made her natural leader. Ezekiel, now 11, had developed his mechanical skills into a profitable sideline. He repaired equipment for neighboring ranches and had even invented a few improvements to common tools. He dreamed of building machines that would make ranch work easier. Little Mercy, now 8, was the family's joy and the ranch's unofficial mascot. She could ride as well as any of her siblings, knew every animal on the ranch by name, and had a voice that could charm birds from the trees. She had no memory of her life before the ranch. This was the only home she had ever really known. Evangeline, now 48, had found a peace and happiness she had never thought possible. The children had given her a second chance at motherhood, and she had embraced it with all her heart. The ranch was prosperous, the family was healthy and happy, and she had a purpose that went beyond mere survival. On this December morning, exactly 5 years after she had found the children in the snow, Evangeline stood on her porch watching them work. Abigail was in the barn going over the books with Thomas. Jeremiah was in the corral training a young horse. Prudence was hanging laundry while singing a hymn. Ezekiel was fixing a gate hinge, and Mercy was playing with a litter of puppies, her laughter carrying on the crisp air. Thomas approached the porch, his hair now completely white but his steps still strong. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years, he said. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Evangeline replied. "Sometimes it feels like they've always been here." "They have, in all the ways that matter," Thomas said. "This place was just a house before. They came. Now it's a home." A rider approached the ranch and Evangeline recognized Sheriff Morrison. He dismounted and walked toward the porch, his expression serious. "Morning, Evangeline." "Thomas." He tipped his hat. "I've got some news you might find interesting." "What kind of news?" Evangeline asked. "Remember that gang that attacked the Morrison wagon train 5 years ago? We finally caught up with them. Turned out they'd been raiding throughout the territory. For years. They're going to hang for their crimes." Evangeline felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but it wouldn't bring back the children's parents. "Have you told the children?" "Not yet. Thought you might want to decide how to handle it." Evangeline nodded. "I'll tell them. They deserve to know." That evening after dinner, Evangeline gathered the family around the fire and told them about the sheriff's news. The children received the information quietly, processing it in their own ways. "I'm glad they were caught," Abigail said finally. "But it doesn't change anything, does it? Mama and Papa are still gone." "No, it doesn't change anything," Evangeline agreed. "But sometimes justice matters even when it comes late. I don't remember them very well anymore," Mercy said softly. "Is that bad?" "No, sweetheart," Evangeline said, pulling the little girl closer. "You were very young, but you carry the best parts of them with you, your kindness, your joy, your love for your family." "We all do," Jeremiah said. "Papa's strength, Mama's gentleness, they're part of who we are. And they would be so proud of who you've become," Evangeline said. "All of you." As the fire burned low and the children prepared for bed, Evangeline thought about the strange turns life could take. 5 years ago, she had been a lonely widow, a chance encounter with 5 freezing children, had changed everything. She had set out to save them, but in the end, they had saved her. The wind howled outside, reminding her of that terrible December day when she had first found them. But now the sound held no terror, only the promise of warmth and safety inside, surrounded by the family that had been born from tragedy and forged in love. Mama Eva, Mercy said, using the name she had called Evangeline since she was 3 years old. Will you tell us a story? What kind of story? Evangeline asked, settling back in her chair. Tell us about the day you found us, Ezekiel said, but make it a happy story. Evangeline smiled, looking around at her children, for that's what they were, in every way that mattered. Once upon a time, she began, there was a lonely widow who thought her story was over. She lived in a big house with too many empty rooms and too many quiet hours. Then one snowy day, God sent her the greatest gift she could imagine, 5 children who needed a mother, and a mother who needed children to love. And they all lived happily ever after, Mercy said sleepily. Yes, Evangeline said, her voice thick with emotion. They did. As she tucked each child into bed that night, Evangeline reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. The frontier was still harsh, still dangerous, still unforgiving to those who weren't strong enough to survive it, but it was also a place where new beginnings were possible, where families could be born from the ashes of tragedy, where love could triumph over loss. She stepped out onto the porch one last time before bed, looking up at the stars that shone brilliantly in the clear winter sky. Somewhere out there, other families were struggling, other children were in need, other hearts were broken. But here, in this small corner of the Wyoming Territory, 5 orphaned children had found a home, and one lonely widow had found her purpose. The ranch was quiet now, the children safe and warm in their beds, the cattle settled for the night. Thomas had banked the fires and checked the locks. All was well in the Thornfield household. Evangeline whispered a prayer of gratitude into the cold night air, for the children who had brought such joy to her life, for the second chance she had been given, for the family that had risen from the ashes of loss. Then she went inside, closing the door on the wind and the cold, secure in the knowledge that love had indeed conquered all. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new adventures. The children would continue to grow and learn, eventually making their own ways in the world. But they would always be connected by the bonds forged in that first desperate winter, when 5 children were left to die in the snow until a widow rancher showed up and changed all their lives forever. In the end, it hadn't been about saving them at all. It had been about all of them saving each other. Now that you've watched the full story, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your thoughts help us improve and ensure we're bringing you the kind of storytelling you truly enjoy.